Hey there, and welcome in to a much more somber post-game edition of the Route 1 Rundown. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and tonight we are talking about the Terps' 87-71 loss to Florida in the Sweet 16. The 2025 Maryland season is over. It is done. The Terps are eliminated, and I know there is so much to talk about. There's probably so much on your minds beyond just the result of this game, what the future holds for Maryland basketball when, and I think it is a when much more than an if, Kevin Willard accepts the Villanova job and ultimately moves on. I know there is so much to think about and talk about, and it's been this dark cloud over the program for really the better part of the last week, even in the midst of this run and this buzzer beater by Derek Queen and this great team, a team that I'll certainly remember forever. I know all of that is going through your head right now. It's going through my head right now. It was almost impossible for it not to be in the back of my mind throughout the entire game, even as I was trying my best to enjoy watching this team that I have truly loved and enjoyed watching all season long for one last time. But where I do want to start tonight is with the actual game itself, because it is not that often, or it has not been often enough, that Maryland has been in this position, that Maryland has been in a Sweet 16. As you well know, just 3 times since winning the national championship in 2002, the first time since 2016. So I do want to start there with the actual game itself tonight, and it was an 87-71 loss to the number 1 seed Florida Gators, the 1 seed in the West region, and Maryland is eliminated. So where did it all go wrong for Maryland? Well, I really thought that the first half was where the game was lost, because it was a missed opportunity. That entire half was a missed opportunity because Florida did not play well. Florida did not play its best. Florida turned the ball over 13 times in that first half. They were sloppy. They were not good. It was there for the taking. Florida did not play its best basketball. Alex Condon, their best big man, third team All-SEC, he goes down about midway through the first half there, leaving a big hole in the middle. And Maryland, I did not think did a good enough job taking advantage of that Alex Condon injury. I didn't think Maryland did a good enough job taking advantage of those 13 turnovers. Maryland was up in turnovers, but they were barely up in the points off turnovers battle. I want to make sure I get the exact numbers right, because I tweeted it out when it was happening. Maryland was +6 in turnovers at halftime of this game, but they were only outscoring Florida 12-9 in points off turnovers. Maryland did not do a good enough job in the first half taking advantage of those turnovers. I didn't think Maryland did a good enough job in the first half and beyond, and Condon would eventually come back into the game with about 13 minutes to go in the second half, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But without Condon in the game, I thought Maryland had a major advantage on the inside. Julian Reese and Derek Queen are probably, if not the best, among the best front court duos in the country. There's some good ones out there, but they are right up there with any of them. And I thought Maryland had a major advantage, at least offensively, inside. I thought Maryland could have gone to those two guys all night, and that would have been a major advantage for them, especially with Alex Condon out. Florida has a bunch of bigs. They have size, but none of them are at the level of Alex Condon, and I felt like that was a big missed opportunity throughout that game. I thought not being able to take advantage of those turnovers, and Maryland was sloppy itself, especially early in that game. I mean, early in that game, Maryland had a bunch of turnovers, and they were unforced turnovers. They were just throwing the ball away. They missed free throws, they missed layups, and they were beaten very soundly on the glass, which is something that the TV crew harped on all night long, and they were absolutely right about that. Maryland was absolutely dominated on the glass. Florida wins the offensive rebounding battle 15-7. Maryland threw the ball away a bunch in the first half, not to the same extent that Florida did, but they were throwing the ball away early, and they got themselves into an early hole. And Maryland clawed itself back into the game, largely on the backs of Julian Reese, Derek Queen, and Jacoby Gillespie. Had a really nice first half. He hit some very big shots in the first half of that game. But I feel like this first half was ultimately actually where the game was lost, despite the fact that it was just a 2-point deficit at halftime, and Florida outscores Maryland by 14 in the second half, 47-33. The first half felt like where the game was lost, because if you had told me before the game, Maryland's going to go +6 in the turnover battle in the first half, Alex Condon is going to get injured in the first half and only play about half the half, but Maryland's going to be down 2 at halftime, I would have told you that was a loss. And the thing that I was most scared of coming into this game were the things that came to fruition. It was the offensive rebounding, and Maryland just has not been good really ever since the Michigan State game. Maryland just has not been good on the offensive boards. They lost that battle to Michigan State in a big way, especially in the second half of that game. They were better in Ann Arbor, but then in the Big Ten tournament against Michigan, they got crushed on the boards. Against Colorado State, they got crushed on the boards. And then again tonight against Florida, they got crushed on the boards. And, it felt like, Queen and Reese can only do so much in that department. Rebounding has to be a whole team thing. You look at a team like Michigan State, and it is those guards. It's the wings, it's the guards, it's the bigs, it's everybody. It's a full team effort. You look at that Michigan State game that Maryland lost, and in that game, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different players came up with an offensive rebound, including guys like Jaden Akins, Jace Richardson, Jeremy Fears. They're guards. And so I have a hard time laying the offensive rebounding woes at the feet of Julian Reese and Derek Queen, although certainly they bear some responsibility for that. I just don't think Maryland's guards were good enough rebounders all year long. I don't think that Maryland, despite having some size, having some length, Maryland just does not have great rebounding guards. Jameer Young is a guy who last year, past couple years, very good rebounding guard despite not being the biggest guard in the world. It's not always about size. Rebounding is a learned skill, and Maryland, for whatever reason, down the stretch was not good enough on the glass, and it really came to fruition tonight against a big Florida team. That was a huge problem. But to me, it's that first half. That was a opportunity. That was a chance. And Maryland just did not take advantage of it. And then in the second half, Florida played much better. And Florida's guards really went off in the second half of that game. I didn't look at the final numbers here. Let me take a quick look at the final numbers here. But Will Richard, Walter Clayton, and Elijah Martin combined in the game for 29, 42 points. Those three guys combined for 42 points. 15 for Richard, 13 for Clayton, 14 for Elijah Martin. They go 5, 8 of 19 from beyond the arc. And that's another thing that Maryland has struggled with this year that I felt like was kind of an Achilles heel for them at times when I thought about where the flaws were within this team. Maryland has struggled with really good guys on the perimeter. Going all the way back to November, you look at a guy like Cam Jones, like Braden Smith. Those were guys they struggled with. Maryland struggled with guys also at the very top of the scouting report. I mean, you go back to just a few games in this tournament. In the Grand Canyon game, Tyon Grant Foster, he goes for 23 on the wing. Nick Clifford for Colorado State, he has a great game for the Rams. He goes for 21. Maryland has struggled with guys at the top of the scouting report. And I felt like Maryland, it seemed like UConn gave everybody really a little bit of a blueprint when they played Florida, and they gave them a real challenge. And it was, you got to be physical with those guards on the perimeter. You can't let them get time. You can't let them get space. You can't give them anything easy. And I didn't think Maryland did a good enough job with that tonight. I felt like in the first half, a lot of those turnovers that Florida had were unforced turnovers. Now, some of it was Maryland, certainly. Some of it was some good deflections, hands in passing lanes, creating havoc. But some of it was just Florida being sloppy. And Florida needs to be much better, I think, than they were in that first half if they truly have their sights on winning a national title. I was not impressed with Florida in the first half, and I thought it was a major opportunity down the tubes for Maryland. And to me, that was really where the game was lost. The fact that Maryland, despite forcing 13 turnovers, despite going +6 in the turnover battle, was down 2 at halftime. Now, with Alex Condon going out, I just didn't think throughout the game while he was out, and both when he then came back in the game with about 13 minutes left in the second half, I didn't think Maryland went at their bigs enough. I didn't think they utilized Julian Reese and Derek Queen enough. I didn't think they tested Alex Condon when he came back in enough. So to me, if you have a guy who goes out, especially a big with an ankle injury, and bear in mind, he had an ankle injury earlier in the season as well, and I didn't think he looked great. I didn't think he looked super mobile when he came back in that game. There was a point where he blocked a shot, was coming back down the court, and he was kind of just hopping around the three-point line. I didn't think he looked full strength at all. I don't know how you're not pulling him away from the basket every time and making him guard on the perimeter, especially against a guy like Derek Queen, where if you can get Queen matched up on him, where Queen is a big that is mobile, that can move, that we've seen face guys up and take them to the basket. I just didn't think they challenged him enough. Now, at the end of the day, maybe this is all nitpicking, because I do think this is a Florida team that's just straight up better than Maryland. This was a fun Maryland team to watch. I enjoyed watching them more than any team since 2010. But my thought all year long really has been that this was a top 12 to 16 team, but not a top 5 team. It felt like a Sweet 16 team to me, not quite a Final Four team. And I think what you saw tonight in Maryland versus Florida at the end of the day is the difference between a Sweet 16 team and a Final Four team. Florida just felt better in every in every area of the game. Florida felt like they were the superior team, except inside when Condon was out, and then Maryland didn't take advantage of that enough. Maryland is good enough and has been good enough all year long to beat any team on the right night, but Maryland is not good enough to force 13 turnovers and only score 12 points off those 13 turnovers in the first half. Maryland is not good enough to get crushed on the boards 15-7 in offensive rebounding and win a game against a team that's a national title contender. Maryland's not good enough to let the opponent hit 11 threes, only hit 6 threes themselves, and still win a ball game. Maryland's not at that level. For Maryland to beat Florida, they would have had to play not a perfect game, but Maryland would have had to play at their best. And I didn't think we saw Maryland's best tonight. I think Maryland would have needed certainly a guy like Selton Miguel to be on. Selton Miguel, 0 for 7 from the field, 0 for 3 from beyond the arc, 0 for 2 from the free throw line, 0 points in this ball game. That was not the way that I wanted to see Selton Miguel go out. I said before the game, I thought Rodney Rice and Selton Miguel would be two big X factors in this game, because we saw UConn get a lot of catch and shoot threes in that game against Florida. Maryland did not have its A game, and it was not good enough. When Maryland's not playing its A game, when Maryland has its A game, I think they are good enough to beat any team in the country. Maryland did not have its A game tonight, and that is not enough to beat a Florida team that is a true national championship contender. So I think at the end of the day, there are things you can look at. There are things you can nitpick. You can look at getting beaten on the glass. You can look at not taking advantage of the turnovers in the first half. You can look at them not getting the ball to Queen and Reese enough, not taking advantage of Condon's absence, not testing him more once he was back in the game. You can look at Jacoby Gillespie picking up 4 fouls, ultimately fouling out of the game. You can look at Selton Miguel not scoring at all in this game. But I think all in all, what we saw tonight were a lot of Maryland's deficiencies come to the surface against a really good basketball team. We saw them struggle against some really good guards out on the perimeter. Again, those 3 guards, Will Richard, Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, go off for 42 points combined tonight. Richard hits 3 threes. Martin hits another 3. Clayton adds 2 more. And Florida hits 11 threes on the night. That's been a deficiency for Maryland all year long. That's been something I've been worried about for Maryland all year long. That was something that came to the surface tonight. Maryland struggles on the offensive glass over the past 6 weeks or so since that Michigan State game. That came to the surface again tonight, and it just felt like the things that we worried about with Maryland really bubbled up tonight. And that's kind of what happens when you play a team that's as good and as talented as Florida. The comparison I made for Florida heading into this game was a more offensively prolific version of Michigan State. And I felt like we saw that to some extent. It's certainly a much more better shooting team than Michigan State. They play a lot of guys like Michigan State. They're good rim protectors like Michigan State, but I think they're on another level than Michigan State. I think that's a good Florida team that didn't have its A game in the first half either, and Maryland failed to take advantage of it. Now, the question I'm sure you're asking, and it will be a question that is asked for years and years and years, is how much did the lingering questions and the cloud around this team about whether Kevin Willard will be the head coach here or not, as soon as, later tonight, how much did that impact the game? How much did that impact Maryland's preparation? How much did it impact the way they played? We'll never truly know the answer to that. There's no way of really ever truly knowing the answer to that question. But I think it goes down in a long line of the Maryland what ifs right there with what if Moses Malone had actually come to Maryland like he had committed to? What if Kevin Garnett had come to Maryland, which he had said later in his NBA career, if he hadn't gone straight to the league, he would go to Maryland? Of course, what would the Maryland basketball program look like if Len Bias had not tragically passed away after being drafted by the Boston Celtics? Those are the what ifs people think about when they think about Maryland basketball. What if Lonnie Baxter had not been called for a fifth foul in the 2001 Final Four against Duke, and Carlos Boozer had been called for his fifth foul instead? Those are some of the what ifs that people talk about in the middle of the summer when they think about Maryland basketball, when they talk about Maryland basketball. I think another one now that will be asked for a long time, especially if we get word later tonight or sometime tomorrow that Kevin Willard is indeed taking the Villanova job, which I would not be surprised if we find out even tonight that that is the case. I mean, everybody is reporting. Anybody who you trust that reports on Maryland seems to indicate that that is what is going to happen. And don't worry, I am going to talk about that more. I'm going to address that more, but I did want to start with this game. The question now, one of the what ifs when you think about Maryland basketball, is what would have happened with this Crab 5 group if Kevin Willard had stayed? If there hadn't been this dark cloud of speculation and uncertainty and wondering heading into this game against Florida. Because we saw tonight, Florida was susceptible in the first half. Florida gave Maryland an opportunity, but Maryland looked sloppy too. Maryland looked discombobulated offensively. Maryland didn't look like they had a good answer defensively. Maryland didn't look like they were physical enough on the perimeter against Florida's guards. Maryland didn't look good enough on the glass. So it's going to be a question that is asked for a long, long time. How much did this whole situation, all the speculation, all the wondering, all the uncertainty, how much did that impact this team heading into their first Sweet 16 game since 2016? We'll never truly know the answer. But it was close enough in the first half. Florida gave Maryland enough of an opening in the first half that you have to wonder to some extent. Now, I could also say Florida pulled away by enough and exposed some of Maryland's flaws enough to say maybe it wouldn't have mattered. But I think it's an impossible thing to know, but it's also an impossible thing to not wonder about. It's human nature. This team has shown they can stick with anybody on any given night. Maryland did not play their best ball in the first half, and Maryland was right there with Florida in the first half as Florida was playing sloppy. It's going to be a question that is asked for a long, long time when you think about the what-ifs of Maryland basketball. Now, I don't want to, obviously it's a loss, the season is over, it's a weird situation, there's this dark cloud over the program of whether Kevin Willard will stay or go, but I can't leave this game, I can't sign off today and end the 2025 season without talking one more time about Julian Reese and the player that he is and the player that he grew into and what he has meant to this program and to this team, this specific team this season. And Reese ends the night with 12 points, 8 rebounds, and there were a couple of moments in the game where it did seem like Julian Reese was trying to will this team to a victory in his senior year. You know, there was a play where he just grabbed the ball away from a Florida player. There were a few moments like that I took notice of where it's like Julian Reese is trying to win this game on his own. Early in the second half, they went to Julian Reese like a couple times real early. He scored on both of them, and he only gets 9 field goal attempts up. You know, you just leave wanting more for Julian Reese. You just wish that he had gotten a few more touches in that game, because I thought he was playing really well. I thought he played well on the defensive end, quite honestly. And Julian Reese throughout this year has made those kind of plays. I mean, I will never forget the play against Vlad Golden where he just ripped the ball away from Vlad Golden in Ann Arbor when Vlad Golden's trying to post him up in the final minute of the game. And Julian Reese rips the ball away from Vlad Golden, one of the better bigs in the country, certainly one of the better bigs in the Big Ten. And you saw some of those moments from Julian Reese tonight. And I can't say enough for the player that I saw him grow into over the course of 4 years. I can't say enough for how he stuck with this program, showed an unbelievable amount of loyalty to this program. And he's a guy that I think Maryland fans will remember for a long, long time, especially in this era where 4-year players are becoming less and less common. It's a joy to watch a guy like Julian Reese grow and develop over the course of 4 years. And I'm never going to begrudge an athlete for going and getting their money when they can, for moving to a better situation if that's what's right for them. But there is really something special as a fan being able to watch a player grow and develop and improve over the course of 4 years. And for Julian Reese, you know, College Park will always be a place that welcomes him with open arms. I would say no matter who the coach is at Maryland, Julian Reese should receive a standing ovation anytime he wants to come to a Maryland basketball game. Julian Reese should not be paying for food or drink very often in College Park. And it's just been... He has been one of the more fun stories of this season. He's been one of the more fun guys to watch. His free throw shooting and the way that's improved this season has been unbelievable to watch. The way that he has allowed himself to stay on the court this season without getting into foul trouble, the way he has taken on a mentorship role with Derek Queen. You know, there are so many guys out there. If a McDonald's All-American at your position was coming in, they would say, see ya, I'm out of here. I don't need to stick around for this. I'm going somewhere else where I don't have to share the spotlight at all. That's not Julian Reese. Julian Reese was the opposite of that, and I will always appreciate his contributions to this basketball program, and it's just been a joy to watch him play. I thought he gave a really nice effort tonight. I just would have liked to see him touch the ball a little bit more. And then Derek Queen. What can you say about Derek Queen? Derek Queen goes out with a 27-point, 9-rebound performance, and I think I saw at some point tonight, Derek Queen did pass Joe Smith for the most points in a freshman season for any Maryland basketball player of all time. I'm trying to find it right now. Maryland's SID, I believe, tweeted it out at some point, or the Maryland basketball account. But yeah, here it is. Derek Queen sets the Maryland record for points by a freshman in a single season, surpassing Joe Smith. So it's truly one of the greatest freshman seasons in the history of Maryland basketball, and Derek Queen was a large part of the reason Maryland was even in this game at all. Queen goes for 27 points, 9 boards, 10 of 10 from the free throw line, and I didn't even think, the crazy thing about this was I didn't even think it was Derek Queen's best game. I thought Derek Queen missed some shots he normally makes. I thought Derek Queen, there's one instance that comes to mind where he drove the lane, felt like he expected some contact, didn't get any, and ended up missing the shot, and it's a shot he would normally make. But Derek Queen, you really can't ask for a whole lot more from him over the course of the season, over the course of this game, and he's a huge part of the reason Maryland had the success that they did this season, that Maryland got back to the Sweet 16. He will always have that moment that buzzer beater against Colorado State. He will live in Maryland lore forever and ever, despite just being a one-year guy. What a year it was for Derek Queen. I have a feeling that it's a year that will never be forgotten. I have a feeling it's a year that you're going to see Derek Queen's name at the top of some of these records for a long, long time. If we're lucky, we'll see guys getting close to him. We'll see freshmen that come in and challenge Derek Queen records. But this was he is a once in a generation type of player. I talked a lot about after the Colorado State game how, Maryland's had really good players over the years. Maryland's had good players drafted to the league. Maryland's had guys that are first team all conference. But Derek Queen just has a special skill set. Derek Queen has a special way about him, whether it's saying, give me the MF ball in the huddle in the biggest game of his career when he's never even hit a game winner, goes out and hits it, or just the way that, he stepped on the court his very first game and put up huge numbers. Derek Queen, in every way, shape, and form, Derek Queen lived up to the hype. I was having a conversation earlier this week about Maryland guys, whether in football or basketball, that have lived up to the hype over the years. And we were trying to brainstorm, we were trying to talk about it, try to figure it out. It seems like Derek Queen is truly the obvious answer. Jalen Smith was a guy very highly touted, came in, had a great Maryland career, ends up getting drafted to the league, but never had the impact that Derek Queen had this season. A very, very good player. Huge part of some good Maryland teams. But nothing like Derek Queen this season. Melo Trimble was a guy. He was McDonald's All-American. He came in. He was a savior for the program in a lot of ways that had missed the NCAA tournament in Mark Turgeon's first 3 seasons. He got Turgeon to his first NCAA tournament at Maryland. He made Maryland's first year in the Big Ten a really memorable one. So he lived up to the hype in a lot of ways, certainly. But what's interesting with Melo Trimble is it never seemed like his sophomore and junior seasons quite matched his freshman season. Now, we'll never know what would happen with Derek Queen because we're not going to find out. He's not going to be here for his sophomore season and junior season. So Melo Trimble up there with Derek Queen. I mean, those are the 2 best freshmen that you can think of in the post-Gary Williams era, certainly. On the football side, Stephon Diggs is a guy very highly touted, very highly rated, didn't get a lot of love nationally while he was at Maryland, but anybody who watched him play, I mean, you saw a linebacker throwing him the ball. He was unbelievable. Anybody that watched him play at Maryland wasn't surprised or isn't surprised by what he ended up accomplishing in the NFL. But point being, Derek Queen is on a very, very small list of guys in Maryland sports history who came in, lived up to the hype that they came in with, and probably exceeded it. In my mind, Derek Queen exceeded the hype. Derek Queen was everything you could possibly want out of a highly rated recruit and more. Derek Queen was so fun to watch with his intelligence on the court, his vision, his versatility, the way he passed the ball, the way he could take you into the post, the way he could face you up, the way that he got to the basket, the way that he would pull that Jokic shot, the way that he ended up hitting jumpers down the stretch at the end of this season here, ended up hitting a couple threes here in the past few games. Derek Queen is truly a basketball player that was a joy to watch because he can do everything. You don't see guys like him come along very often, and from the day he stepped on the court in a Maryland uniform, he was a ton of fun to watch, and that didn't change tonight, even in the loss, as Queen puts up 27 points, 9 rebounds as Maryland falls. And then, another guy that I think was a huge part of this team was Jacoby Gillespie, and what made them so fun to watch and what made them enjoyable to watch. Gillespie, probably with Queen, with Reese, and with 2 prolific guards in Rodney Rice and Selton Miguel, Jacoby Gillespie has probably not gotten as much notoriety as some of the previous Maryland point guards. Anthony Cowan, Melo Trimble. There's so many to name, but those are the 2 guys really at the top of the list. Even Jameer Young, because he had to carry such a heavy load, but in kind of the post-Gary Williams era, those are some of the guys that stand out. And Maryland was always so reliant on one lead guard. What was a little bit different about this Maryland team was that they weren't so reliant on that one lead guard in Jacoby Gillespie. But there were times throughout the course of the season that Derek Queen wasn't always playing great. You might not remember right now, but think back to a point before they had that week off. I think it was end of January. It was after the Wisconsin game. They had a week off between Wisconsin and Ohio State. And leading into that Wisconsin game, Derek Queen had gone for 9 points at Northwestern, just 3 points against Nebraska. He scores 25 at Illinois, but then just 7 against Indiana and 12 against Wisconsin. And there was real legitimate talk from people. Has Derek Queen hit a freshman wall? I don't know. Could be tough for him the rest of the year. And it's kind of laughable now looking at how this season ended and, of course, the Colorado State shot. But there were times in the middle of the year where Derek Queen wasn't super good offensively, or at least wasn't putting up a ton of numbers offensively. And Jacoby Gillespie had to carry a little bit of a heavier load. Now, Julian Reese certainly inside picked up a lot of that slack, but there was a period of time where Jacoby Gillespie really did have to carry a little bit of a heavier load than what we've seen him have to carry down the stretch here. And he had some big games in conference play. He was so critical to running this offense, his ability to get to the basket, his three-point shooting prowess, and with the lack of depth that Maryland had, really, you saw a huge drop-off in the way the offense was run when Jacoby Gillespie wasn't on the court. Now, I don't know. Jacoby Gillespie is a guy that has eligibility remaining. Jacoby Gillespie started his career at Belmont, played 2 years there, obviously played this year at Maryland, so he has another year of eligibility remaining. I don't know whether he'll be back or not. Rodney Rice is a guy who has eligibility remaining. Rodney Rice has a couple years of eligibility remaining. I don't know if Rodney Rice will be back or not. And I think that would be the case even if we knew Kevin Willard was staying. Because in this era of college basketball, it is truly a year-to-year proposition. With the transfer portal, with unlimited transfers, with NIL, it is truly free agency every year. And you know what? I know a lot of people have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with it, or that's just the way it is. Like, I've long been a proponent. I've long been a supporter that college basketball players, college football players deserve to get paid. Now, is this the greatest system in the world? No, absolutely not. But they got to figure out something better, and I don't think it's going to happen until there's some sort of collective bargaining, which I don't think is going to happen for a little while here. So I'm just kind of living in the reality of the situation. I like seeing these guys get paid. It's not a perfect system by any means, especially with the unlimited transfers, and what it creates is free agency every year. But I'm not going to sit here and complain about it. It just is what it is. You got to play within the system. So even if Kevin Willard were definitely coming back, and everybody knew, it's not a guarantee that Gillespie would be back. It's not a guarantee that Rice would be back, because those two guys had great years, and they're going to be coveted guys going into this offseason. I could very easily see an SEC school with a lot of NIL money wanting either of those guys. And I think that would be the case even if Kevin Willard was definitely coming back. And with all the uncertainty and kind of the assumption that he won't be back, I think it's hard to possibly say definitively either of those guys will be back. But of course, they were huge contributors in parts of this team. And then the guys that are moving on, Selton Miguel, Jordan Geronimo, out of eligibility, Julian Reese out of eligibility, Derek Queen definitely going to the NBA draft. So this will be a very different looking Maryland team next year, whether Kevin Willard is the coach or isn't the coach. Now, I've talked for half an hour, talked mostly about the game. I got Zach in the chat asking, did you talk about the possible level of distraction the Willard situation may have caused? And I did talk about it. I talked about, I think it's impossible if we'll ever know truly what a distraction it was. But I think it goes down in the all-time what-ifs in Maryland history. Right there with what if Moses Malone had stuck to his commitment and gone to Maryland? What if Kevin Garnett had gone to Maryland like he said he would instead of going to he didn't say it at the time, but later in his NBA career, he said, if I had gone to college, I would have gone to Maryland. What if he had gone to Maryland? Of course, what if Len Bias hadn't tragically passed away? What would that have meant for the Maryland basketball program going forward? What if Lonnie Baxter had not picked up a fifth foul in the 2001 Final Four and that foul had been called on Carlos Boozer instead? What would have happened in that game? Could Maryland have gone back to back? And I think this now goes down as one of those questions. What if there hadn't been all this uncertainty around the team, around the program leading into this Florida game? Because we saw that Florida was susceptible to getting beat. We saw that last week against UConn. We saw it tonight in the first half, and Maryland wasn't able to take advantage of it. 13 forced turnovers in the first half, but only up 12-9 in points off turnovers. It just wasn't good enough. And I don't think we'll ever truly know the answer to that question. I can make the argument that it probably had a big impact, but I could also make the argument that, what we saw tonight from Maryland were the flaws that were always kind of there beneath the surface. Florida was just a good enough team to expose them. So I truly don't know. Nobody will ever know, but it certainly goes up there with the what ifs, all the big what ifs in the history of Maryland basketball. Is what would have happened with the Crab Five if there had been more certainty around the coaching situation heading into this Sweet 16 game against Florida. And then as far as the roster, just talked about the roster a little bit. I think even if Kevin Willard was staying, it would be a very different looking roster next year. Really, Jacoby Gillespie and Rodney Rice would be the two critical guys, but they are going to be coveted guys on the transfer market no matter what, even if Kevin Willard was staying. So let's talk a little bit about the Kevin Willard situation. We've talked about the uncertainty, talked about how it might have impacted this team, but I want to talk about it a little bit more broadly because I do expect Kevin Willard will be the next Villanova head coach. We'll find out, I'm sure, within the next day or so. I wouldn't even be shocked if we find out sometime tonight that Kevin Willard has accepted the Villanova head coaching job. And I want to talk about some of the feelings and emotions around it, because what I realized today as I was thinking about it, as I was talking about it with people, and I've been working under the assumption that he in fact will be the next Villanova head coach. What I've kind of come to realize is what I think hurts so much about this isn't that Kevin Willard is a surefire Hall of Famer and Maryland's, missing out on a guy that was going to lead them to glory for the next 10, 20 years, was going to be the next Gary Williams, was definitely going to lead them to a Final Four and a national championship. No, I like Kevin Willard enough. I think he did a very nice job with this year's team. I think he did a great job identifying some guys in the transfer portal. I think he did a great job adjusting his offensive strategy. I think he is a very good defensive coach, but I don't think he's a surefire Hall of Famer. But I think what is tough to wrap your head around, what's tough to grasp, if you love Maryland basketball, and anybody who's listening to this I'm sure does, is that somebody would view the Maryland basketball program, view the Maryland basketball job as a stepping stone. If you're at McNeese State, if you're at Colorado State, if you're at Drake, if you're a fan of one of those programs and your team goes on a run, you expect that. That's just par for the course. It comes with the territory of being a mid-major. But if you're Maryland, you don't expect that. Maryland's a destination job. Maryland's a place that, to me, to you, people want to be at. You work your whole life to get a job like the Maryland job. And it really hit me today as I was seeing some scenes around College Park. And there was a tweet out there showing the lines to get into the various bars at around, a little before 5 p.m. this evening in College Park. And I know this program has warts. I know it's not perfect. I know there are things the athletic department can absolutely do better, and I'm not saying the athletic department is perfect. I'm not absolving them of anything. I know there are warts here, but this is a special place when it comes to college basketball. It really is. There are so few places in the country that place this level of emphasis, this level of importance on the basketball program in the way that Maryland does, especially at places that have both football and basketball. There are very, very few out there. Maryland is one of those places. And I know the attendance hasn't always been good. I know people haven't always shown up. I've complained about it myself. I've been frustrated by it at times. But what you got to remember at the same time, too, is people really haven't been given a much of a reason to show up for a long time. But at its heart, college basketball matters in this area. Maryland basketball is more important than the NBA franchise in the area. Maryland basketball, my entire life, Maryland basketball has been more important culturally to sports fans in this area than the NBA team, the Washington Wizards. That's just a fact. I don't think you can even debate that. And I don't think you can say that in a lot of areas. And so what struck me today as I was seeing those scenes in College Park is that Kevin Willard may not think that this is a destination job. And I know this place has flaws. I know this athletic department isn't perfect. But Maryland is a special place if you're a college basketball coach, if you're a college basketball player. Maryland is still one of the few places in this country where basketball is number one. Basketball is the top dog. Basketball is more important to the Maryland fan base than football is. And I love Maryland football. I was a season ticket holder of Maryland football for years and years and years while I lived in Atlanta. I went to like 2 games a year, and I always tried to make sure a Maryland fan was in those seats. I bought them just to support the program. I love Maryland football. But Maryland basketball holds a different level of importance. And it may not be a destination job for Kevin Willard, but I can assure you, with the right investment and with the right coach, this place is as special as any. And somebody is at some point going to come in and take this job and realize how special it is. Realize what this program can be. Realize that it's just a sleeping giant that's been waiting for a moment like this. And you saw it this week. You saw it over the past 2 weeks even. The fan base has come alive. I would even say longer than 2 weeks. I would say towards the end of the season here, you saw what Maryland is capable of really from that Michigan State game on, the level of investment and interest in this program. When Maryland basketball is at its best, Maryland basketball is only second to the 2 NFL teams in this area, the Commanders and the Ravens, as what's important as far as sports in this region. So this may not be a destination job to Kevin Willard, and that's what I think hurts me. That's what I think probably hurts you as somebody who loves Maryland basketball, because I know how special this place is. You know how special this place is when it's at its best. And there's issues. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not trying to absolve the athletic department of anything. And that is one thing I want to emphasize is over the next couple days and weeks, as there's more conversation about this, like, everybody is going to push their own agenda. The athletic department is going to make it seem like Kevin Willard was being extremely unreasonable. The Kevin Willard people are going to make it seem like the athletic department didn't acquiesce to what he needed in order to build a championship program. You are going to hear various versions of things. Everybody's going to have their own story. And what I've always been told is there's 3 versions of every story, and the truth is somewhere in there's 2 versions of every story, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. I butchered that a little bit. 2 versions of every story, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And that's what I think this situation really is too. I think there are probably things Kevin Willard is right about, that Maryland needs to step up the level of investment in basketball. And I want to see this athletic department invest in basketball as much as anybody, because I think and I know how important it is to this place. It still holds a very culturally important place in the hearts of sports fans in this area, even people that didn't go to Maryland. There are so many people that did not go to Maryland that are Maryland fans, and that matters. So I want to see this investment. I want to see investment as much as anybody. But I think we just got to be cautious about believing one side completely or the other side completely. I think there are some things Maryland basketball, the athletic department probably has to do to up the level of investment. But the reality of the situation in that regard is the rumors are that Villanova is going to dedicate $8 million of their $20.5 million in rev share to the basketball program. And if you're not familiar with what's happening next year, there will be revenue sharing with college athletes. Every athletic department can share up to $20.5 million with their athletes. It's up to the discretion of each athletic department how they want to split that up. Villanova, of course, a school without football, or without FBS football, I should say, is going to be able to dedicate a lot more money to the basketball program than a Big Ten program, than an SEC program, than a Big 12 program. So I think some of the numbers coming out right now from other schools who have indicated how they're going to share are, for schools with big-time football programs, they're going to be able to give about $4 to $5 million to the basketball program. And to compete with a school like a St. John's or the Villanova that just doesn't have to support football, that rev share number, it's never going to be able to be matched, at least in the current setup. Now, it's possible schools can supplement with additional NIL, but there's supposed to be some clearinghouse for any deal over $600 that basically evaluates whether a player is getting fair market value for the deal or is just being compensated as an enticement to play for your university, essentially. Now, I color me skeptical that will hold up for very long, and color me skeptical that the SEC and the Big Ten will ever really agree in the long term to a system like that gives an advantage to anybody else in anything that they care about. If you're a college football fan at all, you're seeing it right now in the college football playoff and the new structure they're negotiating. The Big Ten and the SEC are trying to guarantee themselves each 4 spots in the new college football playoff. They hold all the power. They have all the money. And I would be shocked beyond belief if there's really going to be a system in the long term that gives the Big East, a conference without football, an advantage in basketball, because there are plenty of Big Ten schools that really care about basketball. Look at what the SEC is doing this year. This version of the SEC might be the best conference ever. 7 teams in the Sweet 16. Alabama wins tonight, goes to the Elite 8. Florida wins tonight, goes to the Elite 8. I mean, we could have an all-SEC. It's possible. Could have an all-SEC national championship game. This could be the best one-year conference ever. SEC fans like doing that. They like going to Final Fours. And that's just not schools like Kentucky that have a strong basketball tradition now. It's schools like Auburn. It's schools like Alabama. It's schools like Tennessee. They like doing it. So I would be shocked beyond belief if in the long term, the SEC and Big Ten ever give any sort of real advantage like that to the Big East. So if that's the decision-making by Kevin Willard, that seems very short-sighted to me. Now, maybe there's a chance he just wants to be in the Big East. He wants to be in Villanova. I guess. But my overall point being all of this, I think there are some more things Maryland's athletic department certainly can do to invest in the program. I think there are more things that this fan base can do as well to kind of be there a little bit more through thick and thin. And I know it hasn't always been fun or easy. And look, last year was one of the worst years of Maryland basketball I can remember. And it felt like a chore to go to those games. So I'm not big on blaming fans, to be honest, because at the end of the day, it's a product that you're paying for. And you have to make the decision with your free time whether you want to spend on that product or not. I more tend to put the blame at the feet of the people who actually do this for a living. So the athletic department, the coaching staff. So I think there are more things Maryland athletics can probably do to support the basketball program. But at the same time, I think as a head coach, there's some things you maybe need to keep in-house. There's maybe some certain ways to go about things to get what you want, to get that additional support. And I'm not sure that the way Kevin Willard acted over the last 2 weeks indicates that he was ever really interested in doing that. I thought he was using it as a leverage play, but more and more it seems like he was just dead set on going and was gonna kind of burn bridges on the way out. I see in the chat, Willard just had another bizarre post-game presser. If anybody wants to give me some additional info on that, I'd love to know what he said. Obviously, not able to watch it right now, so I'd love to know more about that. But it's going to be interesting what's next for Maryland basketball. I don't know who the next coach will be. I don't have any inside info on who the next coach will be. I have some thoughts on, who I think could be good candidates, the type of candidates that I would like to see Maryland kind of go after. And, I don't know if now is the time to do that. I might talk about that a little bit more sometime next week as this coaching search presumably gets more underway here. But what I do know and what I realized today is that this whole situation with Kevin Willard hurts so much for me because Maryland's a special place to me. And Kevin Willard has basically said, this isn't a destination for me. It's a stepping stone. And I don't think anybody's ever viewed Maryland as a stepping stone. I haven't. I'm sure you haven't. And I know there's a lot of coaches out there who absolutely view Maryland as a destination, who absolutely view Maryland as a place that you want to finish your career, not a place that you use to step somewhere else. This is still a place that has a lot of basketball tradition. This is still a place that places a great amount of importance on basketball. And I see a comment in the chat from Zach. It's changed since joining the Big Ten. The lack of rivalries in the regular season are tough. I couldn't agree with that more. And I think it's been a tough transition over the past, 12, 11 years now. First season was 2014, 2015. So I think it's been 11 full seasons now in the Big Ten. I agree. I think that's been really tough, and I've talked about that before. Like losing, or in some of the bigger moments that Maryland has had in the post Gary Williams era, they beat a very highly ranked Iowa team in one of the first couple years in the Big Ten. And I've said that moment didn't feel as big because it was number 3 or whatever Iowa and not number 3 North Carolina. You replaced the name Iowa with North Carolina back in 2015 when that game happened, and it feels like a much bigger moment. I think that's been a hard thing for Maryland basketball. I think that's been a hard thing for Maryland basketball fans. There were so many rivalries in the ACC. Of course, the Duke one overshadowed everything, but North Carolina was a big rivalry. NC State and Maryland had some legendary games. UVA was always a big one. Even Maryland and Virginia Tech started building a bit of a rivalry after they joined the league. I think that has had an impact. However, I will say in the past maybe 2 or 3 years, I've started personally to feel a little bit more a part of the Big Ten. And it might just be 10 years of playing these teams, getting to know them, getting to know the fan bases, building up a little bit of history. But I think part of it, too, is watching what the ACC has become. Because the ACC just isn't the ACC that I grew up with. The ACC isn't what I remembered. The 9-team ACC was just about perfect. I can't imagine a better basketball league than the 9-team ACC. But that's not what it is anymore. You got SMU and Stanford and Cal and Notre Dame and Pitt and Syracuse. And Syracuse would be a nice little basketball rivalry there, but it's not the ACC that I grew up with, that you grew up with. It's just not, I don't miss it. I don't lament not being in that league anymore. So I've started to feel a little bit of a turn myself in the past couple years where it feels like Maryland is more part of the conference now. And Maryland basketball in the Big Ten has been surprisingly disappointing. For Maryland, if you had told me that Maryland would be 11 years into this league and never have made a conference tournament final, absolutely that's disappointing. It's really unbelievable that Maryland has not even been able to get to a conference tournament final while in the Big Ten. That Maryland has made one Sweet 16 while in the Big Ten. A lot of people thought when Maryland joined the league that they would be able to step right in and immediately be one of the best programs in the league. And it kind of felt like that because 3 years in the Mark Turgeon era, he wasn't able to make the tournament in the ACC. They step into the Big Ten. They're good right away. They're beating Michigan State right away. Melo Trimble's having that unbelievable season. And it looks like Maryland, this is a league Maryland may be able to step into and immediately compete for conference titles year after year after year. Well, lo and behold, 11 years in, one regular season title, 0 conference tournament final appearances. I know everybody weights that conference tournament a little bit differently, but that's not very different than what Maryland was doing in the ACC with Duke and North Carolina, 2 of the blue bloods of the sport in that league. So, yeah, I would agree that Maryland basketball has been surprisingly disappointing during their time in the Big Ten. As far as what Willard said in his presser, apparently he said, he doesn't know what he's going to do. I'm pretty sure he knows, and I'm pretty sure we'll find out sooner rather than later. But this has absolutely been a bizarre twist and turn as far as all of, this run, this magical run where Maryland was the top story of the day on Monday coming out of the second round. That Derek Queen buzzer beater was the top story nationally. And this whole week has really been clouded by this Kevin Willard to Villanova speculation. As far as other coaching candidates, could Dwayne Simpkins be the next head coach? I mean, I think it is possible. He's a guy who I know had a desire to be on Mark Turgeon's staff and had interviewed a couple times. Dwayne Simpkins, of course, a former Maryland basketball player, currently the head coach at American University. And I think just his first year, a couple years on the job now, been the head coach there since 2023. American to Maryland is a big step, and it's typically you kind of look back at the direction Maryland's gone with their past couple of hires. So Mark Turgeon sitting head coach at Texas A&M, Kevin Willard sitting head coach at Seton Hall. The MO for the past couple of hires, post Gary Williams, has been sitting head coach at a power level, taking a coach out of the SEC, taking a coach out of the Big East. Now, personally, for me, I don't know that that's a requirement. I mean, you look at who's left. This is a good exercise, actually. Let's look at who's still left in the tournament. Well, I'm just going to go down the Ken Palm rankings here. You look at Duke, John Shire, an assistant under Coach K. You look at Florida, Todd Golden was the head coach at San Francisco before they hired him. You look at Houston, Kelvin Sampson, obviously longtime head coach. He was out of the game after his tenure at Indiana. So, tenured head coach. Auburn with Bruce Pearl, similar situation there. Tennessee, Rick Barnes, tenured head coach. Alabama with Nate Oates, he was the head coach at Buffalo when they hired him. Michigan State, Tom Izzo, been there forever. Texas Tech, Grant McCasland in the Sweet 16 right now. Grant McCasland was the head coach at North Texas when they hired him. One more for you. Arizona, Tommy Lloyd, longtime assistant at Gonzaga under Mark Few. So I don't think it's necessary to hire a sitting head coach in order to be successful. You look at some of those guys, you look at Golden, you look at Lloyd, you look at Oates, you look at McCasland. Those are guys who are able to be successful relatively quickly. So I don't know enough about Dwayne Simpkins, honestly, the way, the style of basketball he wants to play, his coaching prowess to truly know whether he would be successful or not. But I don't think you can automatically just cross a guy off the list because he coaches in the Patriot League. Or in the case of Nate Oates, coached in the MAC. Or in the case of Todd Golden, coached in the WCC at San Francisco. I don't think those are reasons to just automatically cross a guy off. Now, the challenging thing for Maryland in the situation that they are likely going to find themselves in right now is that a lot of those top mid-majors, a lot of those guys who have had really good success have already been hired this cycle. Minnesota hires Nico Medved, who I'm sure you now know was the head coach at Colorado State. He's a guy who's been pretty highly thought of for a couple years. Iowa hires Ben McCollum from Drake, who had an excellent season. He had just moved up. This guy was coaching D2 basketball just a couple years ago. Comes to Drake. Now he's going to be the head coach at Iowa. Indiana got the prize of the whole cycle with Darren DeVries, was the head coach at West Virginia, but before that, he was at Drake. Just 2 years ago, he was coaching at Drake. they get Darren DeVries. So a lot of these top guys who were mid-majors this year or were very recently mid-majors are kind of off the market right now. Now, a guy who was a very hot name just last season is Josh Schertz. He was the head coach at Indiana State. He took them to an unbelievable season. They played a really fun style of basketball. They had some fun players. They were NCAA tournament snubs a season ago, and then he took the head coaching job at St. Louis. And St. Louis this season in the A-10 went 19-15. Okay season, not a great season, not a tournament team, but he's a guy who runs a very fun style of play. He gets up and down the court. His teams shoot a lot of threes, pretty analytically driven. The Athletic did a great story on him. He has a really interesting history, really interesting background, but he's a guy who took Indiana State, a team in the Missouri Valley, to number 38 in Ken Pom last season. I really thought they should have been in the NCAA tournament, even though they lost to Drake in the Missouri Valley Championship game a season ago. But he's maybe a guy. Like, you look at a guy like that, I don't know why he isn't as good a candidate with a higher ceiling than some of these sitting head coaches. Like, even a guy like Kevin Willard, who Maryland takes from Seton Hall. But the MO of Maryland's athletic department, I realize it's, a couple different athletic directors now, and that's a major question, is who's even going to be making this coaching hire if Kevin Willard does move on, given that Damon Evans is now the athletic director at SMU. Of course, Maryland has a interim athletic director, but who's even going to make this hire? And who wants to come and work in an athletic department where you don't know who your boss is going to be? That's something that's definitely going to raise some eyebrows for coaches. So, could Dwayne Simpkins be a candidate? Could he be the next head coach? Yeah, I think it's entirely possible. And I don't think it's discounting that he's at American. I don't think you have to be a current sitting power conference head coach to have success at the next level. He's had some success at American. It's certainly a lower level, but I don't think that's disqualifying. I don't think that's discounting. I think there are a bunch of guys out there, with Josh Schertz being a really interesting candidate, who would probably be more appealing than a guy, some of these sitting power conference head coaches who have been, mediocre at the places that they've been. Another guy that's coming up a lot, that's more in the vein of like the Tommy Lloyd at Arizona, is Luke Murray, assistant coach at UConn. Been there for Dan Hurley's back-to-back national championships. Of course, the son of Bill Murray. That's why if you watch UConn basketball, you see Bill Murray at a lot of those games. He's a guy who's a fast riser in the industry. He's a guy who has been an assistant coach at the absolute highest level, has won national championships. Could somebody like that be an interesting candidate for the job? Potentially. Either way, it's going to be a wild week if Kevin Willard does end up taking the job, which I expect him to. I expect him to be the next head coach at Villanova, and then the real fun will begin for Maryland as they try to identify who the next head coach is. But whether Kevin Willard is the head coach or not, I do expect this roster, this team, to look incredibly different next year, just given the fact that you lose Julian Reese, you lose Derek Queen, you lose Jordan Geronimo, you lose Selton Miguel, and that Jacoby Gillespie and Rodney Rice are going to be two of the more sought-after guys this offseason because of how good they were this season, and the fact that college basketball is now a year-to-year proposition where you have free agency every offseason. And I expect there to be some heavy hitters coming off those guys, because those are guys that can contribute to a Final Four team, a national championship team, and I expect Maryland to have to pay up to keep them. So no matter who comes in as head coach, whether Kevin Willard, in the off chance he does stay, or Maryland brings in somebody new, the investment in the program has to be there to keep guys like that. I think I'm going to end here for tonight. I really appreciate everybody who tuned in over the past couple of weeks. If you caught the live streams during the tournament, they were a ton of fun. I mean, I don't know if I've ever had more fun doing a podcast than after the Colorado State game. That was an absolute blast. Sincerely appreciate everybody who has tuned in over these past couple of weeks. And hey, I am not going anywhere. There's going to be a lot coming up as far as this probable coaching search over the next couple of weeks. And I'm talking Maryland basketball all season long. So make sure you go and find this show on YouTube. It's part of the Department of Hoops, youtube.com/@Department of Hoops. You can click that podcast tab and find the Route 1 Rundown, or you can get it wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, you name it. The Route 1 Rundown. Subscribe, like, tell a friend who loves the Terps, because I am going to be covering this very likely coaching search and talking Terps basketball all season long. That's the show for today. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.